Let's talk about the systemic impact that this has on women. Obviously, when you and I were talking, we were talking about hashtag mom life and like what it's like with children and the stress that happens in midlife for so many women. It's a really unique time in that we have parents who are aging. We have children who are no longer children. They're turning into teenagers and young adults. And then we have our own, career. This is usually, 40s, 50s, 60s typically is a time where we are, at the peak of our career, let's say. So there's a lot of different things that we're juggling. And for women, of course, we have this very obvious change in our reproductive hormone concentration. So the estrogen and progesterone are the first to, and testosterone sort of follows with it as well. But, progesterone famously starts, early, estrogen follows, and testosterone sort of just goes downhill for the ride with both of them. Who's this sort of hormonal armor, let's say? I want to talk first about the gut's role in processing sex hormones, how that changes through perimenopause and menopause. And I have a couple of other questions that are related to that. So let's maybe start with the gut microbiome's role in metabolizing hormones. And specifically, I'd love for you to speak about the estrobolome.
Yeah, so the gut microbiome is responsible for metabolizing these hormones. I mean, that is what the estrobolome is the estrobolome is responsible for metabolizing estrogen and making sure that we're recycling it properly and not having either estrogen dominance or not enough estrogen. And, I see this time and time again where, I have been knee deep in researching all about menopause for the last, 5 to 7 years, and every single menopause expert is always number one they talk about is you need to take care of your gut during this process. It is not to say that you could have this really healthy gut and you're not going to lose your sex hormones. You're going to eventually, but it is such an important, especially if you're making estrogen or if you're taking estrogen, you want to make sure that you're recycling that and it's excreted properly, that you have regular bowel movements. And that is so critical. So the estrobolome is basically a group of bacteria, a subgroup of bacteria that is helping metabolize the estrogen.
Okay, so estrogen is like the golden rule of estrogen is like use it and then lose it, right? Mm-hmm. So we want to use it, but we don't want it to hang around so that it can cause some of these pro-inflammatory, in terms of the menstrual cycle, a lot of women will notice things like PMS, moodiness, tender breasts, water retention, etc. I believe it's beta-glucuronidase, if I remember correctly, which is as the estrogen is being conjugated and sort of getting ready to be excreted, if we have this dysfunction in the estrobolome, as you're describing, we can deconjugate the estrogen. So it's like it's on its way out, right? It's like set to get out, set to exit the system. And then you have this dysregulated estrobolome, let's say, that's like, no, actually, hang on a minute, and takes, estrogen's suitcase, so to speak, takes her passport so she can't leave. And then she kind of gets reabsorbed back into the system. So what are some of the knock-on effects of having a dysregulated estrobolome? And then I think the more important question here is then how do we change it? Like the spore-based probiotics that we've been talking about, how do we use that as a way to attenuate I should say augment the estrobolome, like to improve it?
Yeah, well, we have to be focusing on our gut health. The spores are a really, really powerful tool in your toolbox to take care of your gut health, but it's one tool. So there are other things that we could be doing. Even things like meditation or calming practices or going on a walk in nature. Everyone thinks like, oh, what's that going to do for me? But we have no idea. Like you mentioned, all the things that us midlife women are dealing with. It is so real. And like when you said that, it's like, oh my God, all these light bulbs are going off in my head. It's like, yep. I'm dealing with all those things too. And it's like everybody listening is probably in the exact same boat. And and the other thing is we're just throwing all this information at us. Like we should be doing this, we should be doing that. And I always say when it comes to hormones, when it comes to any type of thing that you're dealing with, you just have to start with the gut. It is the most important thing to be doing, is to be focusing on your gut, because if your gut is inflamed, it's not absorbing those nutrients. It's not assimilating those nutrients. So we have got to be really aware of our gut microbiome and how it is, the health of it, because it's going to affect the things like the hormone metabolization, and it's going to affect our mood and all of the things that we're dealing with during hormonal changes in our body, whether it's when your reproductive years or whether it's during your menopausal years and perimenopausal years. So I think it's important that people start with, doing things like meditation or calm or walking in nature. I think it's really important to eat a diverse group of foods. Diversity, I think I mentioned that earlier. Diversity is such a key indicator of the health of our microbiome and therefore the health of our whole body. And by eliminating foods, which I think the world we're living in is always eliminating, we're on different types of diets that are eliminating foods. I'm a fan of trying to start introducing new foods that maybe have been problematic. Once you start healing your gut and making these changes, you will be able to start absorbing these foods and be able to tolerate them better. So I would suggest a diverse group of foods, calming practices, walks in nature, exposing yourself to bacteria. I mean, bacteria is our friend. I wouldn't be using a lot of household products that says kills 99.9% of the bacteria. There's actually studies that show that those products actually have raised children who have more autoimmune issues and allergy issues because we're killing the good bacteria. Another big thing is trying to avoid glyphosate, so trying to eat as clean as possible, trying to eat organic as possible. These are all things that are going to help your gut microbiome. And then, of course, the spores. It's the hammer of all your toolkits. It will make a huge difference, but there's other things. I would never say just go take the spores and then go eat your fast food and your ultra processed foods and keep living a stressful life. We have to make dramatic changes in our life, and it's hard. It's hard. I could speak from experience. Started this business when my youngest was in middle school. My oldest was I think she was just starting high school, and now I'm a grandmother. I've got a 28-year-old. I have a 22-year-old, and it's like those were such formative years of their lives. And it's like I was running a business and doing all this and wanted to be there for everyone. And everyone's got their own story like that. They all have their own story of all the things that they're juggling. And so, but you have to make really big changes in your life just to have a calmer lifestyle. And then I think the spores is another huge tool in that.
What do you think about fermented foods? One of the things I love, probably have it daily, is sauerkraut. And I have, when the sauerkraut is done, and there's more, this is like, I don't know if this is TMI, but when the sauerkraut is done, I drink the juice. I just love, I don't know, I go crazy for this brine that the sauerkraut is in. Uh-huh. I love the brand that I do this with is Bubby's, no affiliation, but they just make the best pickles and the best sauerkraut. Absolutely love them. Yeah. What are your thoughts on fermented foods? Can that help with, we were talking about the spores being like the gardeners and they're tilling the soil and getting rid of the weeds. Can eating fermented foods also help plant healthy plants and help the gardener in terms of, help the spores in terms of what they're doing? And do you have other examples of foods that you think that we should be eating? Is it like foods from the ground? Let's say you mentioned tubers and things like that. Are there other sort of categories of foods that you would recommend people be consuming on a regular basis?
Yeah. So first I'll answer the question about the foods. So unfortunately, the foods are not, it's hard to find foods that are teeming with those bacteria because our soil is so overfarmed, depleted of nutrients, contaminated with all these glyphosates. Again, if we went to some tribe that has, untouched soil, absolutely all the food that you're eating off the land, and if you're being exposed to the dirt and the dirt that's on these vegetables or tubers, yes, you will be able to get the spores. But unfortunately, in the world we're living in, we're not getting them. Fermented foods I feel that fermented foods are incredibly beneficial. I eat sauerkraut a lot myself. I'm a huge fan of fermented foods. What they are not, though, is a replacement for a true probiotic, because just like Lactobacillus bifidobacterium strains that you find in other probiotics out there, they will die by the time they get to the intestines. They will provide some benefit to the gut. They are very gut supportive. They are nutrient dense. They have all kinds of other benefits for the gut, but they are not a replacement for a spore-based probiotic. But I would never encourage people not to eat them. I eat fermented foods all the time. I'm a huge fan of fermented foods. And that's what I always say, it's hard because with the probiotic, you can't really find foods that are going to replace what a spore-based probiotic does. With prebiotics, on the other hand, we also have a very, very targeted prebiotic formulation, but you could eat prebiotic foods. You could go eat lots of Jerusalem artichoke, asparagus. I mean, there's lots of prebiotic foods if you're eating them in a lot of, high amounts. But with probiotics, it's really hard to find a food that's a spore-based probiotic that would,
especially
be a spore.
Since like agriculture, they don't really rotate their crops either, right? I remember reading some stat. It was like we had 20 uses left of the soil if they were not left to sort of rest and regenerate. But what we do is we pull the carrot out and then we just put another seed of a carrot in the same nutrient, because the carrot will suck up all the nutrients from the soil as well, right? So there's with traditional agriculture, let's say, we have this issue. And I think also, this may be getting slightly off topic, but we also have this sort of demonization of cows. It's like, oh, cow farts, those are, sort of, let's just kill all the cows. It's like, well, if you let cows and chickens and all the animals sort of wander, right, and poop and pee all over the soil, that's also a form of like letting the soil actually, not turn into dust or sand, essentially, and getting the minerals seeping deep into the soil as well. So I think that, your point is well taken around, you can go to the grocery store and try to, purchase the tubers and the beets and the, whatever it is, understanding that those vegetables were probably grown in nutrient depleted soil to begin with, which is also why it's like, find a local farmer's market, talk to the farmer, understand how they're growing. Are they doing crop rotate? Like, ask them some of these questions if it's available to you. Yeah. And if not, then just understand that the vegetables and the products that you're consuming in a typical grocery store probably are coming from nutrient depleted soil.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it is so true. I mean, we're just not getting the nutrients. People will say like, well, my grandmother, my great grandmother, they weren't taking supplements or they weren't doing all this. And I agree. And believe me, if you could see what my supplement container looks like, it's just that our food doesn't have the nutrients that we need anymore. And we're living in a world that's just so offensive to our health. I mean, it's terrible that we live in this world that every day we're dealing with glyphosates that are sprayed on our food. We're dealing with these, household products that are we're being exposed to these bleaches and all these other different ingredients that are just so disruptive to our bacteria. And then to make matters worse, we're not getting the nutrients from our food anymore because our soil is so depleted, and they're not rotating the crops like you mentioned, and it's unfortunately not the best picture that we're living in. But there is good news out there that we have seen companies bring some really thoughtful products to the markets, thoughtful supplements that really are helping people change. And my husband and I started this business. We came from big pharma. We saw the abuses in big pharma. We saw the overprescribing of medications. We saw it day in, day out, and we saw it with our own family members. And we came into this business for the whole purpose of making the world a healthier place. And we've done it. I mean, we've done it. We've seen it for the last 12 years, what has happened with our customers and our clients. And I'm always about, we want to bring products that are studied and researched and backed by science. That's really, really important to us, because we want to elevate the standard in the supplement space. I mean, back 12 years ago when we started, there were hardly any products out there that had a double-blind human clinical trial. Even to this day, there's very few that have double-blind human clinical trials, their actual formulation. Our studies is not on just one strain in our probiotic. It's actually on our entire formulation, which is a huge distinction and something we could talk about maybe on another podcast. But it's so interesting and how important that is to have a actual study on the finished formulation, because so many products are taking a study from one strain and then mixing it with another strain and you don't know what happens. But I do feel like, obviously, podcasts like yours, people are educating themselves. They're learning about the different supplements out there. And there is some really good news out there for people that they could supplement properly. They should eat properly. I'm not suggesting to not eat healthy foods because the soil is contaminated, because there are still some nutrients in these foods, but we do need to supplement, because a lot of what nature gave us is being taken away.